Hi everyone, it's Liam here from A Shot of Wildlife, and in this very special video as part of Norfolk Heritage Open Days we've come to the new Water Mills and Marshes Mills Walk in Halvergate. Now today I'm going to be discovering a little bit of the history of some of the mills on the walk, but also trying to find some of the hidden nature that makes use of this amazing man-made landscape. Let's get going. The walk starts about a mile east of the village of Halvergate, between Norwich and Great Yarmouth. Things got off to a great start, as before I could even retie the first gate, I caught a glimpse of this marsh harrier flying low over some nearby cattle. More than a quarter of the UK's population can be found in Norfolk, where they cruise along the open fields and reed beds in search of small birds and mammals to prey upon. The first section of the route follows the same path as the Weaver's Way, heading southeast from the starting point along the top of an embankment. This gives amazing views out across the grazing marshes, but you need to keep your head on a swivel to not miss some of the wildlife that lives here. This meadow pipit didn't fly up onto the second gate until after I'd passed by. These yellow and brown mottled birds are the most common songbird of the UK's uplands, but they can just as well eke out a living in the grasslands and farmlands of Norfolk. I carried on walking, passing by fields of uninterested cattle separated by man-made ditches full of fresh water. These create a great highway for the UK's commonest swan, the mute swan. There are actually 3 species of swan that can be found in Norfolk, but the other 2, the Buick and the Hooper, are almost entirely winter migrants. Mute swans are the only one with orange beaks with the raised black bump at its base. As the path continues further into the Broads, the horizon grows and grows, but there are a few landmarks that stand out above it. As I was taking in the beautiful view, I noticed some movement down near my feet. This watermint flower stands out amongst the reeds as a source of food for passing insects. Here, a stunning small copper butterfly has lots of competition from smaller flies, so hurries from flower to flower to collect as much nectar as it can. This second watermint plant is less popular and hosts a single green-veined white butterfly and a common green colonel soldier fly. The entire landscape here has been moulded by the actions of people. These large drainage mills are what has made it all possible, and without them, the Halvergate Marshes would look completely different. So just behind me is the first mill on the route. This is Mutton's Mill. Mutton's Mill is named after the last keeper to work the mill, Fred Mutton, who stopped working it in 1947. The mill is privately owned, but it's being restored through the Water Mills and Marshes project. It currently has 2 large patent sails and a 6-bladed fantail. This mill, just like most of the other mills in Norfolk, was built to use the wind to help drain the water from the marshes. By working in sequence, these mills could move water over large distances and eventually out of the marshes completely. So far, I've walked just over 1 kilometre, and to continue on the trail must follow the raised embankment northeast from the mill. The next section of the route doesn't seem to have been grazed recently, and this well-grown vegetation provides a lot of hiding places for wildlife. One creature that would not win any competitions for camouflage is this peacock butterfly. Each of its wings is adorned by a brightly coloured eye spot that serves to confuse and dissuade any potential predators. These butterflies spend the winter in the UK as adults, seeking out places under bark or in tree cavities and crevices in which to hibernate. When temperatures rise again in the spring, the butterflies emerge and begin to seek out a mate. There was another butterfly here too, a wall-brown butterfly. This species gets its name from its habit of basking on walls and stones, but this one has chosen a dirt-based basking spot instead. As relaxed as they may look, these butterflies need to keep their wits about them as there are predators here too. This black-tailed skimmer could make a good meal out of a butterfly. Dragonflies have lots of adaptations that help them to be formidable aerial predators. Their forewings can move independently, allowing them to fly quickly and to be agile in the air. They also have massive eyes with exceptional, almost 360-degree vision, and as they survived since before even the dinosaurs evolved, they must be doing something right. In some nearby reeds, I spotted these reed buntings swaying in the breeze. These sparrow-sized birds are common around wetlands where they build their nests amongst the dense reed beds. Throughout most of the year they feed on seeds and grains, but when rearing chicks they switch to a diet of insects and invertebrates. The bird at the back here seems to have caught a white moth or butterfly. Throughout the marshes there is such a range of habitats that it provides a home or at least somewhere to feed for so many different species. Here a group of starlings are scouring the edge of a muddy puddle in search of insects to eat. And here a little egret that was feeding in a ditch by the path saw me, and once it feels confident it flies off to the far side of a field out of the range of my camera. A species that might sound a bit out of place are these oyster catchers. I'm fairly certain there are no oysters amongst the cowpats. In seriousness, these birds are just using the area as a place to shelter and rest up before moving back to the mudflats to find their aquatic invertebrate prey when the tide is right. A few hundred metres further down the track and I get my first glimpses of the next mill on the trail. In the background you can see the modern day wind turbines generating electricity in the North Sea off Great Yarmouth. Well, I've just made it to the second mill of the walk. This is Halvergate Mill. Now this place is currently a little bit derelict, but the Water Mills and Marshes project are going to restore it. Halvergate Mill is also known as Lubbock's Mill or Gilbert's Mill and has a blurry past with limited history available. The mill has been unused for many years and as a result of subsidence needed to be jacked back up to a straight position in 1995. The Water Mills and Marshes project will be working over the coming months and years to further stabilise the structure and to help it remain as a landmark on the horizon. For now though, its aluminium cap provides a great vantage point for cormorants to roost in between fishing trips out to sea or further into the Broads. From here, the path continues east and it isn't long before I start to see the next mill in the distance. This is Howard's Mill. It is privately owned and was renovated in the 1980s into the condition that it now stands. The mill doesn't have any mainsails, but on top of the tarred red brick tower is a fine example of a wooden boat-shaped cap and an 8-bladed fantail. This shape of cap was actually invented in the Broads, and the fantail is responsible for turning it so that the mainsail is always pointed into the wind. The next section of trail passes by a few private houses and some farm buildings, and whilst taking in the beauty of a nearby reed bed gently flowing in the wind, I spotted this easily recognised brown creature. This is a European or brown hare. Unlike rabbits, hares don't live in burrows but rely on their sharp hearing and keen eyesight to spot potential predators. They will then often remain still, hoping to stay undetected, but can run at speeds of up to 45 miles per hour if they feel threatened. I didn't want to make this one run, so left it be. Just up ahead, I spotted two little birds on the path. The bird on the left here is a yellow wagtail, and this is the first time that I've ever seen one in Norfolk. They are summer migrants and require a mosaic of habitats with lots of insects, so the Halvergate Marshes is the perfect place for this one to spend its summer and rear its chicks. As the wagtail moved on, I noticed this common darter dragonfly clinging to the reeds. This one is a young male, which would have spent 1 or 2 years in the nearby ditches as an aquatic nymph before emerging in the early summer. As he becomes mature, his body will change into a deep red colour and he will begin to look for females to mate with. I got distracted on the next section of the route and was too busy watching the nearby cows and amazing landscape that I didn't spot this Chinese water deer until it jumped across my path. It was too quick for me and disappeared before I could get any good footage of it. At the next section of concrete, it's time to turn away from the main route and follow the road to the southeast. As I turn the next corner, I get the first good view of the fourth mill on the route. If you look closely, you can even see Atlantis Tower about 4 miles away on Great Yarmouth seafront. To get to the mill and the most easterly point on the trail, I have to cross over some train tracks, so after checking that the coast was clear, I made my way across. Well, I've just made it to the fourth mill of the walk. Just there is Lockgate Mill. Now to the right hand side of that you can see an embankment, and that is to separate the tidal Breydon water from the marshes. All of the other mills on this route were built to drain the Halvergate Marshes, but Lockgate Mill actually helped to drain the Achill Marshes to the north. The mill was last worked in the 1940s and has fallen derelict since then. In 1953 the sails were blown off in a storm, and in the early 2000s a fire was deliberately started inside the mill. Just like Hy's Mill, Lockgate Mill has been fitted with an aluminium cap to protect the fittings that remain inside. Behind where I'm stood there is an electric pumping station that has taken over the role of the mills and pumps any excess water from the marshes into Breydon water. The next section follows the Weavers and Wherryman's Way, heading southwest along Breydon Water on top of the flood bank. Breydon Water connects with the North Sea through Great Yarmouth and is highly tidal. When the tide goes out, vast expanses of mudflats are exposed, and this makes the place a complete haven for wading birds. Here in the distance are some black and white avocets, the RSPB's flagship species. And here is a teenage shelduck. This is a teenage herring gull. The young gulls are mottled grey and gradually get their white and grey markings over the 3 years that it takes them to reach maturity. The next species that I managed to get footage of was much closer in, on the flood bank itself. This is a common blue butterfly, and as beautiful as it is with its wings closed, it isn't until they open them that you get to see the striking blue colours from where it gets its name. In a freshwater ditch that runs along the marsh side of the flood bank, this family of mute swans stood out amongst the lush green vegetation. Their cygnets are about half grown and are still covered in a grey coat of down. I'm not sure what the author of The Ugly Duckling must have been thinking. I think these cygnets are already almost as pretty as their parents. As the path zigzags south, I can already start to see the next mill way off in the distance, but I'm sure there's lots of wildlife to find before I get there. These birds are black-tailed godwits. They're an extremely rare breeding bird, but thousands migrate down from Iceland to overwinter here. These ones are stabbing into the soft mud in search of crustaceans and aquatic insects to eat. Look how fast they have to probe the mud in order to find enough food to survive. So far, I've looked at a few of the mills at Halvergate, but haven't spoken about why the marshes were drained in the first place. The land in Norfolk is very close to sea level, and in the early 1600s the sea breached the coast at Eccles and salt water poured over miles of land that had been used to grow crops and livestock. The salt water killed all of the plants and all of the animals that relied on the fresh water to survive. As a result of this, an Act of Parliament was drawn up in 1610 that sought to improve flood defences and strengthen riverbanks throughout the Broads. One proposal at the time was to pump water out of the marshes using windmills or horse-powered pumps. And so it began. By the end of the 18th century, the Broads were peppered with mills that worked in sequence with one another to pump water through a network of ditches into rivers where it could be washed out to the sea. If this work had not been done and continued into the present day, this landscape is likely to have looked very different. As the path continues, it separates away from Breydon Water and begins to follow the course of the River Yare. This building is the old Berney Arms pub, which has sadly been closed for the last few years. As it stands, its roof provides a good spot for young swallows to rest and for adults to collect pieces of moss to mix with mud for building their nests. The trees behind the pub were also jam-packed full of birds. The birds with bright yellow patches on their wings are adults and juvenile goldfinches, and the bird to the top right with the reddish breast is a linnet. There are several free boat moorings along the stretch of river between the pub and the next mill, but on the day of my visit there was only a couple of boats moored up. So here we are at the fifth mill of the day. This is Berney's Arms Mill. Berney Arms Mill is the largest mill on the walk and in fact the tallest drainage mill in Norfolk. It was built in 1865 to grind materials used to make concrete, but converted in 1883 to use a scoop wheel to lift water from the marshes and directly into the river. In the past the mill has been open to public visitors, but it is currently closed for refurbishment. Hopefully it will be open again in the future. As I took in the scenery from Berney Arms Mill, I noticed that I wasn't alone on the riverbank. On the opposite side of the water was Europe's largest wading bird, the Eurasian curlew. These birds used to be common, but due to low breeding success they are now in real trouble. Some experts believe that they may actually go extinct in southern England within the next 10 years, and there are now just 300 breeding pairs here. Moving on from the mill and away from the river, the path now follows the Weaver's Way northwest. The route is well signposted and passes through several fields and kissing gates until you reach a train crossing at Berney Arms train station. This is the most remote train station in the whole of the UK and can be reached by requesting the stop on the Norwich to Great Yarmouth train line. Up ahead on the muddy track, I spotted this painted lady butterfly trying to soak up some of the evening sunshine. If you look really closely, you might see that it is gently vibrating its wings. This is because butterflies are cold-blooded, and by flexing its wing muscles this way, it keeps its body temperature up, allowing it to quickly move if a predator approaches. The next part of the walk passes through several large cattle fields, and although I didn't come across any, there are fresh signs of cattle grazing, so if you ever visit, please be aware that they might be present. Always make sure you properly close any gates that you open and act responsibly around livestock and in the countryside in general. As I crossed the next wooden bridge, I spotted this grey heron skulking amongst the reeds. They are well known for eating fish, but here on the marshes they will also hunt amphibians, small mammals and even small birds if they can catch them. They sometimes remain completely still and wait for prey to pass by, then ambush it by spearing it with their beaks and then swallowing it whole. In order to reach the sixth and final mill, instead of following the Weaver's Way from here, stay on the main track. The reeds either side of the track are quite high, and this allowed me to get really close to this Chinese water deer. Once it saw me, instead of running away, it lay down in the grass and tried to hide. Chinese water deer are of course not native, but are declining in their natural habitat and doing quite well here. More than 10% of their global population now lives in the UK. Can you see that way off in the distance? That's the last mill of the day, Stones Mill. Now that place is derelict, and that's how it's going to remain as a haven for the wildlife that has set up home there. Stones Mill is quite away from the track, but even if it was closer, the surrounding vegetation has been allowed to grow quite a lot and it is inaccessible. The mill is the most derelict of all the mills on the route, and it no longer has a cap at all. This means that the interior fittings are exposed to the elements and will eventually rot away. But this does also mean that wildlife has complete access, and the building probably provides shelter for a wide range of nocturnal and cryptic species such as barn owls and bats. From Stones Mill, it's only a few hundred metres until I get back to the raised up bridge where the journey began earlier. Here you can see Mutton's Mill in the distance, and although I didn't see any more wildlife, I did manage to see Stones Mill behind me as it was lit up by the evening sunshine. On the last few hundred feet, I caught a glimpse of this Chinese water deer as it bolted across a field before hiding amongst some tall grass. And also this grey heron as it gave a bull some evening company. Well, here we are then, back to where the journey began around 3 hours ago. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of the wildlife that lives in this fantastic man-made landscape, so I guess I'm going to have to come back again. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the Water, Mills and Marshes project, or the work they're doing, there'll be a link for that down below and coming up across the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.